Hi, everyone. The generation that refused to enter Eretz Yisrael because they were afraid is the same generation that later attempted to storm Eretz Yisrael despite explicit divine opposition. Yeah, that's strange. In one day, we're told, Velo avisem la'alos, they refused to enter the land. The very next day, they declared, Hinenu v'alinu, here we are, and they're ready to rush ahead. So what changed overnight? Did cowards suddenly become heroes? Did weak people suddenly become brave? And so if so, why were those in that second group, the Ma'apilim, failures in their endeavor? Perhaps the most frightening possibility is that they didn't change at all. Perhaps both moments came from the very same mistake. Moshe gives us a clue. When he retells the Meraglim episode in Devarim, he inserts a detail that was absent in Parsha Shlach. Vatikrivu neilai kulchem, we'll read on Shabbos. He reminds the people that they all came to him. And Rashi adds, Be'erbuvia, they came as a mob. That's strange. Why does Moshe care about crowd control? Why now, on the eve of his death, revisiting the greatest national catastrophe of his career, why now is he suddenly concerned with whether the people stood in line properly? Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi states that because Moshe was identifying not the sin, but the condition that made the sin possible. The problem wasn't the Meraglim, the spies. The problem was that Klal Yisrael at that moment had ceased behaving like a covenantal nation and had begun behaving like a crowd instead. You see, a crowd isn't defined by how many people are standing together. A crowd is defined by what happens when emotion replaces direction. Crowds are driven by emotion. Communities are driven by mission. Crowds are reactive. Communities are purposeful. Crowds ask, what are we feeling? But by definition, communities ask, what are we called upon to do? The moment the Jews became a crowd, Torah and Torah life became impossible. Because Torah is built upon process. The Sanhedrin, the elders, the Masorah, the deliberation, the authority, and of course, the patience. In fact, the Netziv suggests that kulchem doesn't mean that everybody came. Kulchem, you came all together, means only the leaders came, but they represented the will of the people. And if so, asks Rabbi Yaakov Shalazinger, what exactly was the sin? And his answer is quite devastating. The leadership, he opines, had surrendered its independent role. Instead of asking, what message should Klal Yisrael hear, the leaders asked, what message does Klal Yisrael want to hear? Leadership became reflection rather than guidance. The leaders stopped asking, what does Hashem demand from us? And began asking, what does the nation want from us? And now, suddenly, the Ma'apilim, the group that came the next day, and their sin becomes understandable. The conventional reading is, first they lacked courage, and then they found courage. But Rav Kook and the Netziv suggest that there's something deeper going on over here. The Ma'apilim possessed an extraordinary passion. According to the Netziv, they even interpreted Hashem's refusal as a test of their commitment and their resolve. And in that regard, they saw themselves like later Jewish historical heroes, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who checked with the Nabi Yechezkel before being cast or casting themselves into the fiery furnace. And hearing that no miracle was coming, as suggested by Yechezkel, and jumping in anyway. According to Rav Kook, they possessed a holy longing for Eretz Yisrael. Either way, the Netziv or Rav Kook, the Ma'apilim's mistake was not insufficient idealism. Their mistake was that idealism had detached itself from the Torah process. Their passion outran their covenant. And in this regard, the Meraglim episode and the Ma'apilim are actually mirror images. The run-up to the sin of the Meraglim, the spies, teaches us that passion without courage fails. The Mapilim episode the next day shows us that courage without submission also fails. But beneath both lies the same disease. A crowd has energy, but a community has direction. And perhaps this is exactly what Chazal mean when they highlight the reason for the destruction of the Batei Mikdash. The first one, through corrupt justice that destroyed society, and later the second one through sinas chinam. Now, many assume sinas chinam is apathy, but the opposite was true. In the time of the Batei Mikdash, everyone cared. The tragedy wasn't that people stopped caring. The tragedy was that people cared deeply, but their deepest loyalty became attached to their own vision rather than to the collective destiny of Klal Yisrael. It was passion detached from covenantal structure and energy without any direction. In fact, the Maharal in Netzach Yisrael explains that the Beis Hamikdash was not merely a place where Jews gathered, it was the structure that transformed separate individuals into a nation. One Kohen Gadol, one Mizbeach, one Makom, one center towards which all of Klal Yisrael oriented themselves. The tragedy of the Churban was therefore not simply that Jews disagreed. Disagreement was never the problem. The 12 Shvatim were never identical. Yehuda had one mission, Dan had another, Yosef had a third. The Kohen didn't become a Levi, the Levi didn't become a Yisrael. The greatness of Klal Yisrael was never that everyone became the same. The greatness of Klal Yisrael was that different people with different strengths and different perspectives and different passions could bring their unique contribution to one shared avoda. The tragedy of the Churban, therefore, was that we lost the ability to organize our differences around a shared center. Everyone had energy, everyone had conviction, everyone had passion, but what was missing was direction. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning of the opposite of Beis Hamikdash. The opposite of Beis Hamikdash is not destruction. The opposite of Beis Hamikdash is chaos, because a Mikdash means everything has a place. Every korban has a place, every person has a role, every utensil has a means, and every passion has a purpose. And perhaps this is the fundamental difference between a crowd and a community. A crowd is a collection of people standing close together, but a community is a collection of people standing together for something. A crowd asks, what do we feel? A community asks, what am I responsible for? A crowd asks, how can my passion win? A community asks, how can my passion serve? But this leaves us with the most important question. If passion without direction has brought such destruction throughout Jewish history, does the Torah's answer require less passion? Should we care less? Should we be less committed? Should we stop fighting for what we believe? Perhaps the greatest tragedy would be if, in trying to avoid the mistakes of the Meraglim and the Mapilim, we created a generation that no longer burns or yearns for anything. The Jewish people were never destroyed because we lacked passion. The danger was never the fire. The danger was fire without a vessel, fire without a menorah, fire without a mizbeach. But this raises the deepest question. What's the Torah's model for passion? Does the Torah ask us to extinguish the fire? Absolutely not. The first thing we're told about the Mizbeach is Eish Tamid Tukad al Mizbeach. There should always be a fire on the Mizbeach. The Torah doesn't fear fire. The Torah demands fire. But there's a critical difference between fire on the Mizbeach and fire outside the Mizbeach. The fire on the Mizbeach isn't weaker. It's stronger because it's disciplined. It's powerful because it's directed. The difference isn't the fire. The difference is where it burns. And that's our avoda of these 3 weeks. Not to extinguish our fire. Not to become people who no longer care. Not to remove conviction and passion or commitment. Rather, the question is whether we have learned to place our fire on the right mizbeach. Because the Mapilim teach us one of the most frightening lessons in the Torah. A person can have tremendous passion. A person can have tremendous courage. A person can even have a holy dream and still be moving in the wrong direction. And perhaps that leaves us with two very uncomfortable questions. Not for the other side, for ourselves. First, is my passion coming from my avoda, or is it coming from my ego? Am I asking, how can I serve Hashem, or how can I prove I'm right? And second, is my passion building Klal Yisrael, or merely building my vision for Klal Yisrael? Because every faction before the Churban believed that they were defending something sacred. The question was never whether their fire was real. The question was whether their fire was still burning on the Mizbeach of Klal Yisrael, or whether it had become a fire unto itself. Perhaps this is why Moshe cared so much about one seemingly insignificant detail. Not just the Meraglim, not just the military strategy, not just the geography, but the fact that they came Be'er Buvia as a mob. Because Moshe understood something terrifying. A nation can survive fear. A nation can survive mistakes. A nation can even survive failure. But when a nation cannot survive is becoming a crowd. The Jewish people, we've never lacked fire. We've always had fire. The question of of history has never been, do Jews care enough? We care. We always have. The question is, can we all take all of our different fires and place them onto the same Mizbeach? Because a crowd has energy, but a community has direction. A crowd can create a fire, but only a community with a covenant can go ahead and build a mikdash. And perhaps that's Moshe's final lesson before Tisha B'Av. Don't lose your passion. Don't lose your idealism. Don't lose your fire. But remember, the same fire that illuminates a menorah can also consume a house. The difference isn't the fire. The difference is whether we're willing to place it on the Mizbeach of something greater than ourselves. The Jewish people have never lacked fire. And the task of every generation, including ours, is to ensure that our many flames become one avoda rather than many conflagrations. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to